Davin Kael had been staring at gravitational displacement readings for 16 hours straight, and his eyes felt like someone had replaced them with dried figs. The kind his grandmother used to send him from Earth, back when supply runs were regular, and the Meridian's echo wasn't operating at the absolute edge of mapped space, 3 months deep into a survey mission that seemed to stretch longer with each jump. He pushed back from his workstation in the navigation wing, the chair making that pneumatic hiss that always sounded vaguely disappointed in him. The stellar cartography suite was finally quiet, the day shift long since rotated out, leaving only the ambient hum of the ship's drives and the occasional ping of deep space radiation hitting the hull shielding. Comforting sounds, really. The sounds of staying alive in an environment that very much wanted you dead. His neck cracked as he stood, a sound that would have horrified the ship's medical officer, but Tors wasn't here to lecture him about ergonomics and spinal health. The corridor outside glowed with that soft amber lighting the ship automatically shifted to during night cycle, a concession to human circadian rhythms that the mixed crew half appreciated and half ignored. Lieutenant Oro, the Centauran engineer, had once told him the lighting made everything look like it was trapped in old honey, which Davin thought was both poetic and slightly disturbing coming from a being who could see in infrared. The navigation wing was quiet, most of its occupants either sleeping or pulling duty elsewhere on the ship. His quarters were just down the hall, third door on the left, a fact he'd internalized through 3 months of repetition. 30 paces, turn right, scan palm, collapse onto bunk, achieve unconsciousness. Simple, automatic, except his brain was still cataloging gravitational anomalies and calculating stellar drift vectors, that peculiar state of mental exhaustion where you're simultaneously empty and unable to stop thinking. He reached his door, or what his thoroughly fried neurons insisted was his door, and pressed his palm against the scanner. The mechanism chirped happily, and the door slid open with its characteristic whisper, and he was already 3 steps inside before several things registered simultaneously in his consciousness. First, the lighting was wrong. Not amber like the corridors, but a warmer, more golden quality like sunlight through crystal. Second, there was music, something with harmonic structures that human compositions didn't quite achieve, all resonant frequencies that made his teeth feel strange. Third, and most critically, Sela Vyr was standing in the center of the room, and she was not expecting company. Time did that thing it does during accidents and catastrophes, where everything simultaneously speeds up and slows down. He saw her turn toward him, blonde hair unbound and catching the golden light, those distinctively long, elegant ears, so unlike human ears in their graceful taper, exposed and somehow vulnerable without the practical bindings she wore during duty hours. Her skin, that particular shade of blue that reminded him of Earth's oceans in certain lights, seemed almost luminescent, half covered in what looked like ceremonial wrappings made of something that shimmered between solid and liquid states. Her eyes went wide. His eyes went wider, probably wider than eyes should reasonably go without medical intervention. "Wrong door," he yelped, which was possibly the most obvious statement anyone had made since humanity first pointed at fire and said, "hot." He was already backing up, hands raised in a gesture that was meant to be apologetic, but probably looked more like someone surrendering to very polite muggers. "Wrong door, so sorry, completely my fault, brain offline. 16 hours staring at gravitational fields. Not an excuse, terrible excuse actually." He backed straight into the door frame, which was closed now because the ship's automatic systems had helpfully decided he was inside and should stay inside. A betrayal he would remember when reviewing the ship's programming protocols. He fumbled behind himself for the door control, found something that might have been the control or might have been decorative paneling, and pressed it with the desperation of a man who had just seen something he absolutely should not have seen. The door, taking pity on him or perhaps just following its basic programming, slid open. He practically fell backward into the corridor, his last image before the door closed being Sela's face, frozen in an expression he couldn't quite read. Shock, certainly, but something else underneath it, something more complicated. The door sealed itself with a soft hiss that sounded like the universe making a disappointed noise. Davin stood in the corridor, breathing hard, staring at the closed door. His door, he realized with slowly dawning horror, was one panel to the left. One panel. The doors were identical, the palm scanners calibrated to multiple crew members for emergency access, and his exhausted brain had simply chosen wrong. He looked at his own door, looked back at Sela's door, considered the possibility of requesting an immediate transfer to another ship, preferably one in a different galaxy. From inside her quarters, the music had stopped. He fled to his actual quarters, palmed the scanner with shaking hands, and sealed himself inside. His room was dark, utilitarian, and blessedly free of Thyran navigators in states of ceremonial undress. He leaned against the door, closed his eyes, and tried very hard to think about anything else. Gravitational anomalies, stellar drift calculations, the complete catalog of boring Federation safety regulations. Anything. It didn't work. His brain, which had been useless for the past hour of corridor navigation, was now working with perfect clarity, replaying those 2 seconds in high definition, which seemed cosmically unfair. Through the wall, the very thin wall he'd never particularly noticed before, he could hear nothing. No movement, no music, no sound at all. Just the quiet hum of the ship and his own elevated heartbeat and the growing certainty that he just complicated things in ways he didn't yet understand. Outside his viewport, an uncharted nebula burned in shades of violet and green, radiation ionizing gas clouds in patterns no human had ever named. Beautiful, vast, and completely indifferent to the fact that somewhere in this tiny metal bubble, a cartographer had just opened the wrong door and seen something that would change everything. Davin lay on his bunk, stared at the ceiling, and knew with absolute certainty that sleep was not coming anytime soon. The navigation chamber had become a theater of elaborate avoidance, and Davin was giving what he considered an award-worthy performance. He'd arrived early, positioned himself at the primary cartography console with his back strategically angled so he could see Sela's approach without appearing to watch for it, and had prepared approximately 17 opening remarks that ranged from aggressively casual to professionally distant. He'd settled on mourning Sela as the frontrunner, though his internal rehearsals made it sound increasingly like he was greeting a particularly formal cheese. She entered at precisely 0700, because Sela Vyr was nothing if not punctual, a trait that had made their collaboration efficient for 3 months and was now making this excruciating. Her hair was bound in the complicated series of loops she wore during duty hours, those long ears tucked into practical wrappings that integrated with her uniform's collar. She looked composed, professional, and utterly determined to make eye contact with anything in the room except him. "Morning," she said to the navigational display. "Morning," he replied to his console. They worked in silence for 20 minutes, which was approximately 19 minutes longer than they'd ever gone without talking. Usually by this point, they'd have exchanged complaints about the coffee synthesizer, which produced something that tasted like regret with caffeine, or Sela would have made one of her dry observations about Lieutenant Oro's tendency to explain engineering concepts using increasingly elaborate metaphors involving Centauran mating rituals. Davin pulled up the latest stellar drift data and tried to focus on the numbers. The Meridian's Echo was currently parked in what the crew had started calling the doldrums, a region of space so unremarkable that even the cosmic background radiation seemed bored. They were 3 days out from their actual destination, a cluster of dead moons orbiting a red giant that preliminary scans suggested might contain ruins worth investigating. "The gravitational variance in Sector 7 needs recalibration," Sela said, still addressing the empty air between them. "I'll adjust the sensors," Davin responded to his keyboard. This was fine, totally sustainable. They could absolutely continue working together like this for the remaining months of the mission, without anyone noticing the sudden climate shift in the navigation wing. They were professionals, adults, perfectly capable of moving past a minor incident that was really just a navigational error when you thought about it, which he was trying very hard not to do. The door hissed open and Lieutenant Oro entered, his segmented carapace clicking softly with each movement. The Centauran engineer had a talent for appearing exactly when things were most awkward, which Davin suspected was less supernatural ability and more Oro's general personality. "Did someone die in here?" Oro's translator rendered his chittering speech into flat, deadpan standard. "The environmental controls are working fine, but I'm detecting what my people would call a mating season frost. Should I check the thermal regulators?" "Everything's fine," Davin said quickly. "Perfectly functional," Sela agreed, examining her display with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb. Oro's compound eyes swiveled between them, a gesture Davin had learned meant the Centauran was deeply amused. "Ah, human and Thyran awkwardness, my favorite kind. Carries a particularly delicious flavor of unspoken emotional complexity." He clicked his mandibles in what might have been their species' equivalent of a grin. "I'll leave you to your definitely fine and perfectly functional silence." He left and the silence returned, now with added self-consciousness. Davin cracked first. "Look, about the other night." "We don't need to discuss it," Sela interrupted, still not looking at him. Her fingers moved across her console with unnecessary precision. "It was an accident. You were exhausted. The doors are identical. These things happen." "Right, yes, exactly." He should have felt relieved. Instead, he felt like he'd missed something important. "So we're good." "We're good." They went back to work, and the silence felt even worse than before, like they'd just agreed to pretend a wall existed between them and now had to maintain the fiction. The ship's comm crackled to life with Captain Rothberg's voice, gravelly and efficient. "Senior staff to the briefing room. We've got new data on the temple complex." The briefing room was already half full when they arrived, carefully timing their entrance to be neither together nor suspiciously separate. The main display showed a three-dimensional render of their destination. 5 dead moons in a tight orbital dance around a dying star, all of them tidally locked and atmospherically challenged in ways that made hostile seem generous. Captain Rothberg, a woman whose face suggested she'd been carved from particularly stern granite, gestured at the display. "Preliminary analysis suggests the largest moon, we're calling it primary, has ruins that match the architectural signatures we've been tracking. Temple complex, possibly pre-Federation era, possibly pre-everyone era. If the Founders' map fragments are anywhere in this system, they're there." The Founders' map was the kind of thing that made archaeologists quiver with excitement and made practical spacers deeply nervous. Legend said it showed pathways through space that shouldn't exist, routes that ignored conventional physics in favor of something older and stranger. Most people considered it mythology. The fact that they were out here looking for its suggested command considered it something more. "Environmental window on primary is narrow," continued Dr. Yamamoto, their exogeology specialist. "We've got approximately 6 hours of marginally survivable conditions before the orbital mechanics turn the surface into a radiation bath. We'll need a tight, efficient team." Rothberg's eyes scanned the room. "I want our best people on this. Yamamoto, you're leading the geological survey, tours, medical support, Oro, technical, and for navigation and cartography." Her gaze landed on them with the precision of a targeting laser. "Vyr and Kael, you two have been mapping this region for 3 months. You know the anomalies, the drift patterns, everything that might affect our positioning." Davin felt Sela stiffen in the seat next to him. They hadn't been this close since the incident, and he could smell whatever Thyrans used instead of soap, something that reminded him of ozone and winter mornings. "Acknowledged, Captain," Sela said, her voice perfectly level. "We'll need detailed surface scans before landing," Davin added, because someone had to say something professional. The briefing continued, logistics and contingencies, and the thousand small details that kept people alive in environments that wanted them dead. Davin tried to focus on the technical data, but his awareness kept drifting to Sela beside him, the way her long fingers tapped an unconscious rhythm against her datapad, the slight forward cant of those distinctive ears when she concentrated. After the briefing, crew members filed out in small clusters. Davin deliberately hung back, organizing his notes with exaggerated care, and found himself alone with Sela in the emptying room. "So," he said, "surface mission." "Surface mission," she agreed. 6 hours in close quarters mapping alien architecture. "Apparently, that won't be weird at all." She finally looked at him, really looked at him, and something flickered across her face that might have been amusement or might have been something more complicated. "We're professionals, Kael. We can handle 6 hours." "Right, professionals." He nodded, perhaps too enthusiastically. "I once mapped an entire asteroid field while having food poisoning. This will be easy." That's a disturbing comparison. It seemed relevant at the time. The ghost of a smile touched her lips, the first one he'd seen in days, and something in his chest unclenched slightly. Maybe they could get back to normal. Maybe the weirdness would fade and they'd find their rhythm again. Her communicator chirped and she glanced down at it. "I need to prep the auxiliary navigation systems. We launch in 36 hours. I'll run the orbital calculations." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Davin." It was the first time she'd used his first name since the incident. "For what it's worth, I've walked into the wrong quarters before. Once I ended up in the ship's cold storage. Spent 5 minutes apologizing to frozen vegetable before I realized my mistake." He laughed, surprised and genuine. "That makes me feel slightly better." "Good." She headed for the door, then added without turning back. "Though I should mention that among my people, certain moments create what we call shadow bonds. Connections that exist whether we acknowledge them or not." She left before he could ask what that meant, leaving him alone in the briefing room with a 3-dimensional render of dead moons, and the growing certainty that 6 hours in close quarters was going to feel very long indeed. If you've watched this far, what brought you to this video? I'd be really happy if you share it in the comments. Don't forget to like the video to support me. The transit pod shuddered as it descended through Primary's thin atmosphere, and Davin decided this was an excellent time to regret every life choice that had led him to this moment. The pod's interior smelled like recycled air and someone else's nervous sweat, probably his own from yesterday. Dr. Yamamoto sat up front running geological scans. Lieutenant Oro was doing something complicated with his multi-tool that involved entirely too many clicking sounds, and Tors had already broken out the motion sickness medication. Sela sat across from him, strapped into her acceleration harness, studying her datapad with the kind of focus that suggested she was either very interested in atmospheric composition or very committed to not making conversation. They'd exchanged maybe 10 words since boarding, all of them aggressively technical. "Landing zone in 2 minutes, announced Yamamoto. "Try not to throw up on the equipment." The pod hit something that might have been turbulence or might have been the universe expressing its opinion on their decision-making, and Davin's stomach relocated to somewhere near his throat. Through the viewport, Primary's surface rolled into view, a landscape of dark stone and crystalline formations that caught the red giant's light and threw it back in fragments. The temple complex rose from the surrounding wasteland like something that had grown rather than been built. Its geometry was wrong in ways that made Davin's eyes hurt if he looked at it too long, angles that seemed to shift depending on your viewing position, surfaces that reflected light in patterns that shouldn't be physically possible. "Well," Oro chittered, "that's architecturally unsettling." They landed with a thump that the pod's shock absorbers turned into a merely bone-rattling experience. Yamamoto ran through the safety checklist with the enthusiasm of someone who'd done this 100 times and expected to do it 100 more. Atmosphere is technically breathable, but I wouldn't recommend it long-term. Radiation levels are manageable for 6 hours. After that, we start getting into explain this to your future grandchildren territory. Stay within comms range. Don't touch anything that glows. And if you see anything that looks like writing, photograph it before Oro tries to lick it. I licked one alien artifact, Oro protested, one time. And we learned valuable information about its composition. You spent 3 days in Medbay hallucinating geometric shapes. Valuable information. They disembarked into Primary's perpetual twilight, the red giant hanging bloated on the horizon like a dying eye. The temple loomed before them, all impossible angles and surfaces that seemed to drink in the light. Up close, it was even more disorienting. Davin could swear certain sections were rotating, but when he looked directly at them, they were perfectly still. Team assignments, Yamato announced, consulting her datapad. Oro and I take the western approach. Tors, you're setting up base camp here. Davin Kael, eastern wing. We've got 6 hours, people, make them count. Davin glanced at Sela, who was checking her equipment with methodical precision. Just like old times, he offered, except for the ancient alien architecture and looming deadline. And the fact that this place looks like someone designed it after ingesting hallucinogens, she added, slinging her scanning equipment over her shoulder. Those long ears swiveled slightly, picking up frequencies he couldn't hear. Their sound coming from inside. Harmonic resonances, very low frequency. Is that good or bad? I'll tell you when we're either enlightened or dead. They approached the eastern entrance, a massive archway that seemed to recede as they got closer, a trick of perspective that made Davin's cartographer brain itch. The interior was dark except for a faint phosphorescent glow emanating from the walls themselves, veins of light pulsing in patterns that might have been decorative or might have been some kind of alien text. Stay close, Sela said, activating her wrist-mounted light, and try not to open any wrong doors. He nearly tripped over his own feet. Did you just make a joke about that? I'm capable of humor, Kael. First evidence I've seen in 4 days. Yes, well, I've been busy pretending a certain incident never happened. She moved deeper into the corridor, her light casting strange shadows that bent at angles shadows shouldn't bend, which is traditional Thyran conflict resolution. We simply ignore uncomfortable situations until they become comfortable through sheer force of denial. Humans do that too. We call it being emotionally mature. Is that what we're calling it? The corridor opened into a chamber that made both of them stop and stare. Crystalline structures rose from the floor in formations that looked organic, like frozen trees or captured lightning. The walls curved up and away into darkness, and that harmonic resonance Sela had mentioned was stronger here, a sound that Davin felt more than heard, vibrating in his bones. This is incredible, Sela breathed, moving toward the nearest crystal formation. Her scanning equipment came alive with data, screens filling with readings that meant nothing to Davin but clearly meant everything to her. These are data storage matrices. Solid-state information preservation using quantum crystalline structures. This technology shouldn't exist. And yet here it is, existing very confidently. She touched one of the crystals and it lit up, sudden and brilliant, projecting light into the air above them. Not just light, information. 3-dimensional star charts bloomed in the space between floor and ceiling, systems and nebulae and pathways through space that twisted in ways that made conventional navigation look like kindergarten geometry. Kael, are you seeing this? Sela's voice had gone slightly breathless, that particular tone she got when confronted with something that rewrote her understanding of the universe. She moved from crystal to crystal, each touch bringing new projections, new maps, new impossibilities made visible. Davin pulled out his recording equipment, capturing everything, his mind already racing through the implications. These weren't just maps, they were routes, pathways that seemed to fold space in on itself, connecting points that should have taken years to traverse. "This is the Founder's map," he said, "or part of it. These routes don't match any known navigation charts, because they're not following known physics." Sela was practically vibrating with excitement now, her earlier reserve completely forgotten. "Look at this trajectory. It's passing through a region we classify as impassable due to gravitational shear. But according to this, there's a pathway that treats that shear as negligible." They worked in tandem, falling back into their old rhythm without thinking about it, calling out findings and confirmations, building a picture of something vast and old and utterly beyond current understanding. Davin was busy recording a particularly complex junction point when he heard it, a deep grinding sound, like massive stone moving against stone. Sela heard it too. Her ears swiveled toward the corridor they'd entered from. That wasn't seismic activity. The grinding intensified, and then came a sound like thunder compressed into a single point. The corridor entrance collapsed in a cascade of stone and crystal, sealing them inside the chamber with a finality that made Davin's mouth go dry. "Well," he said into the sudden silence, "this is not ideal." Sela was already at her comm. "We're to base camp. We've had a structural collapse in the eastern wing. We're sealed in but uninjured." Static answered her. She tried again, adjusting frequencies. More static. "Comms are being blocked by something. The crystal structures, maybe, too much interference." Davin tested his own equipment with the same result. They were sealed in an alien chamber on a dead moon, with approximately 5.5 hours before the radiation levels went from concerning to actively hostile, and nobody knew exactly where they were. "On a scale of 1 to 10, he said, "how worried should I be?" 6, maybe 7. Sela was scanning the walls, looking for alternative exits. "The team knows we're in the eastern wing. They'll realize we're missing when we don't report back. We just need to either find another way out or wait for rescue." "Trapped in an ancient alien temple with you. This is definitely karma for the door incident." She turned to look at him, and he caught something in her expression. Exasperation, maybe, but also something that looked almost like amusement. "If you're going to die here, Kael, you should probably stop apologizing for that. It's getting repetitive." "I can't help it. My grandmother raised me to be perpetually sorry." "Your grandmother sounds exhausting." "She was, wonderfully so." He moved closer to one of the crystal formations, studying its structure. "These things are still active. If they can project information, maybe they can receive it too. Could we use them to boost a signal?" Sela's eyes lit up figuratively, though in the crystal light they almost seemed to literally glow. "That's actually brilliant. Help me reconfigure the scanning equipment." They worked together, jury-rigging technology that was never meant to interface with alien crystalline data matrices, and somewhere in the process of debugging quantum resonance frequencies and arguing about carrier wave modulation, Davin realized they'd completely forgotten to be awkward with each other. "Try touching that node there," Sela instructed, pointing to a smaller crystal cluster. "We need a simultaneous input to establish the harmonic bridge." He reached out, and so did she, and their hands ended up on the same crystal, fingers overlapping. They both froze. "This is getting ridiculous," Sela said quietly. "Agreed. We're professional colleagues trapped in an alien ruin, trying to avoid radiation poisoning, and we're acting like children who touched hands accidentally." "When you put it that way, it does sound absurd." She didn't move her hand. Neither did he. The crystal hummed between their palms, warm and alive with whatever ancient technology powered it. "Among my people," she said, "what you witnessed the other night, it's called the Shelvara, coming-of-age ceremony, meant to be performed alone, meant to be private. The shame in being seen isn't about the act itself, but about losing that moment of solitude." "I really am sorry. Let me finish." Her fingers tightened slightly against his. "The shame isn't in being seen. It's in realizing that part of me, a part I didn't know existed until that moment, wished you'd stayed." The crystal pulsed with light, their makeshift signal suddenly broadcasting into the temple's network, but Davin barely noticed. He was too busy processing what she just said, the careful vulnerability in her voice. "Sela, we should check if the signal's working," she said, pulling her hand away, but her expression was softer than it had been in days. His calm crackled to life. "Kael, respond. Kael, are you reading? Base camp, this is Kael. We're alive, sealed in, and apparently very good at alien telecommunications." "Sit tight," Yamoto's voice was tinged with relief. "We'll have you out in 20 minutes. Sela was already recording the remaining data, but she glanced back at him with something that might have been a smile. "Good work, Kael. Good work yourself, Vyr." They had 20 minutes before rescue. 20 minutes alone in a chamber of crystalline maps showing impossible paths through space. 20 minutes that somehow felt both too long and not long enough. The data from the Temple expedition had bought them 3 more months in deep space, which Captain Rothberg announced with the kind of grim satisfaction that suggested she'd expected nothing less. The Founder's map fragments pointed to coordinates in a region officially designated as Empty Sector 47, which was either going to be the most anticlimactic destination in survey history, or exactly the kind of place someone would hide something important. Davin had voted for anticlimactic. The universe rarely rewarded optimism. What he hadn't anticipated was how the Temple incident would shift things between him and Sela. They'd stopped avoiding each other, which was progress, but they'd replaced avoidance with something more dangerous: proximity. She'd started appearing in the observation deck during his off hours, claiming she needed to recalibrate her star charts in lower light conditions, which was obviously false since star charts didn't care about ambient lighting. He'd started taking meals in the secondary mess hall where she usually ate, citing a newfound interest in the synthesizer's Thyran protein options, which tasted like salted cardboard but gave him an excuse to sit across from her. They were circling each other like binary stars, close enough to feel the gravitational pull but not yet willing to acknowledge the inevitable collision. "You're doing that thing again," Lieutenant Oro announced, materializing beside Davin's workstation with the timing of someone who'd been practicing sneaking up on people. "That human emotional complexity thing where you stare at your console without actually seeing it while thinking about someone who is definitely not Sela Vyr. I'm analyzing gravitational variance data." "You're analyzing the back of your eyelids while making what my people call the mating contemplation face. It's very distinctive. You get this slight furrow between your eyebrows and your breathing changes rhythm. Your people are disturbingly observant. We're Centaurans. Observation is literally in our species designation." Oro's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Also, Sela does the same thing. Yesterday I caught her staring at a blank navigational display for 6 minutes. When I asked if she was having a stroke, she claimed to be considering multidimensional trajectory paths in a display she'd turned off." Davin tried to decide if this information made him feel better or worse. "Did you need something, or did you just come here to psychologically torment me?" "Can it be both?" Oro tapped something into his own datapad. "Actually, I came to tell you the doctor wants to see you. Something about mandatory checkups for anyone exposed to alien temple radiation. Try not to look so relieved to have an excuse to leave." Tours ran her medical practice out of a cramped suite near the ship's center, surrounded by equipment that beeped meaningfully, and walls covered in what Davin assumed were either anatomical charts or abstract art. With alien biology, it was hard to tell. "Sit," Tours commanded, gesturing to the examination platform with the authority of someone who'd stopped taking nonsense from crew members around her second decade in space. "Let me scan you for exotic particle contamination. Then we can talk about what's really wrong with you." "Nothing's wrong with me. You've lost weight, you're not sleeping properly. Your cortisol levels are probably elevated, though I'll confirm that in a minute." She ran the scanner over him with practiced efficiency. "I've been a ship's doctor for 23 years, Kael. I can diagnose emotional complications faster than I can diagnose most diseases." "It's nothing. It's Sela Vyr, And it's not nothing. Tors pulled up his readings, nodded at whatever she saw there, and fixed him with a look that suggested she'd heard every excuse in the catalog. Let me guess. You're developing feelings for someone who's not the same species, not from the same world, and you're trapped in a metal box together for the foreseeable future with no clear idea how this could possibly work. That's disturbingly accurate. Like I said, 23 years. She set down the scanner and leaned against the counter. I'm not going to tell you it's a bad idea. I've seen cross-species relationships work. I've also seen them crash and burn in ways that required extensive counseling and sometimes quarantine. Different biologies mean different needs, different life stages, different everything. Thyrans live about 40% longer than humans. Their cultural approaches to relationships are completely alien to us. And that's before we even get into the political complications. This is a terrible pep talk. I'm not done. What I'm saying is that it's complicated, but complicated doesn't mean impossible. It just means you need to be honest with yourself about what you're getting into. She handed him a data chip. Here's some reading material on human-Thyran biological compatibility. It's less exciting than you're probably hoping, but it's informative. I didn't say I was planning anything. You didn't have to. Now get out of my medbay. I have actual sick people to attend to. Davin left feeling both better and worse, which he suspected was Tor's intended effect. The data chip felt heavy in his pocket, a physical reminder of all the reasons this was complicated. He should probably just ignore it, focus on work, maintain professional boundaries. He was busy not thinking about any of this when the ship-wide comm crackled with an announcement that pulled everyone's attention. All crew, this is Captain Rothberg. We've received a priority transmission from Fleet Command. Stand by for briefing in 20 minutes. Priority transmissions from Fleet Command were never good news. They were usually some combination of budget cuts, mission extensions, or warnings about political situations that made operating at the edge of charted space even more fraught than usual. The crew assembled in the main briefing room with the enthusiasm of people showing up to hear bad news. Captain Rothberg looked even more granite-like than usual, which confirmed Davin's suspicions that whatever was coming would not improve anyone's day. I'll keep this brief, Rothberg began, pulling up a star chart that showed the border regions between human and Thyran space. Political tensions in the Carina sector have escalated. 3 border stations have reported incidents ranging from diplomatic arguments to actual weapons fire. No casualties yet, but Fleet Command is concerned about the trajectory. The room went quiet. Border tensions weren't new. Humans and Thyrans had been dancing around each other for decades, all mutual suspicion and carefully maintained distance. But weapons fire was a significant escalation. What does this mean for our mission? Dr. Yamamoto asked. For now, nothing. We're outside the affected regions, and our work here is considered scientifically valuable enough to continue. But I wanted everyone aware that the situation at home is getting complicated. Rothberg's gaze swept the room. We have both human and Thyran crew members aboard. I expect everyone to continue conducting themselves professionally. The political problems of our respective governments are not our problems out here. The briefing continued with updates and contingencies, but Davin barely heard it. He was too aware of Sela sitting 3 rows ahead, her shoulders tight with tension. Those long ears held at an angle he'd learned meant she was upset but trying not to show it. After the briefing, crew members dispersed in uncomfortable clusters, conversations hushed and uncertain. Davin waited until most people had cleared out, then found Sela standing alone near the viewport, staring out at the empty space beyond. "Hey," he said, joining her at the window. "Hey yourself." That was unsettling. Weapons fire between our peoples. Yes, I'd classify that as unsettling. Her reflection in the viewport looked tired. My family lives near the border regions. 3 of my siblings work on trading stations. Are they safe? For now, but if this escalates... She stopped, shook her head. I chose deep space specifically to avoid this kind of politics. Turns out you can't run far enough." They stood in silence, watching stars wheel past in the infinite dark. Davin thought about Tor's warnings, about biological incompatibility and cultural differences, and all the practical reasons this was a terrible idea. Then he thought about being trapped in a temple chamber, their hands touching a crystal, the way she'd said she wished he'd stayed. "I've been thinking about what you said," he offered, "in the temple." "I've been trying not to think about what I said in the temple." "Well, that's unfortunate because I haven't been able to think about much else." He turned to face her directly. "For the record, I wish I'd stayed too. I know that's probably the worst possible thing to say right now, given everything, but there it is." Sela finally looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. "This is a terrible time for this conversation." "Probably. Our governments are on the edge of conflict. We're trapped on a ship together for months. The practical complications alone are extensive, I'm aware. And yet you're standing here telling me you wish you'd stayed." "Apparently, I make poor decisions under pressure." She laughed, sudden and genuine, and the sound of it made something in his chest feel lighter. "That makes two of us. I've been eating in the secondary mess hall for 3 weeks. The Thyran proteins taste like construction materials, but it gave me an excuse to see you. I knew you weren't really recalibrating star charts in the observation deck. The lighting is terrible for charts, but it's excellent for accidentally encountering people." She moved slightly closer, close enough that he could see the faint bioluminescent patterns in her blue skin, visible only in dim light. "I don't know how this could possibly work, Kael. Different worlds, different biologies, different everything. And now our governments are shooting at each other. I don't know either, but I think we should figure it out anyway." The ship lurched suddenly, a gravitational anomaly catching them off guard. Standard for deep space, usually meaningless, except this time it threw Sela forward and Davin's reflexes caught her without thinking, his hands on her arms steadying her. They froze like that, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin, could see the way those long ears twitched slightly, and what he'd learned was the Thyran equivalent of flustered surprise. "Emergency lockdown," the ship's automated system announced. "Solar storm detected, all crew to nearest secure locations. Estimated duration, 8 hours. Of course, because the universe had a sense of humor. The viewport shutters began to close, blast doors sealing sections of the ship against the incoming radiation. Sela looked around the observation deck, which was rapidly becoming their temporary prison, and started laughing. "What?" Davin asked. "We're locked in together, again. I'm beginning to think the universe is making a point. If the universe is making a point, it's being very unsubtle about it." The lights dimmed to emergency levels, bathing everything in soft red that made Sela's skin look purple. 8 hours. Just the two of them, in a space barely 20 meters across, with nothing to do but talk or not talk or figure out what exactly was happening between them. So Sela said, 8 hours. 8 hours. We should probably use them productively. Absolutely very productive. He was still holding her arms, he realized, had been this entire time. "I'm going to be honest, I have no idea what I'm doing here." "Neither do I," she reached up, her fingers touching his hand where it rested on her arm. "But I think that's okay. We can figure it out together." Outside, the solar storm raged against the ship's shields, radiation hammering at metal and energy barriers that held against the onslaught. Inside, in the dim red light of emergency systems, two people from different worlds stood close enough to feel each other's warmth and tried to find words for something neither of them had expected. "Tell me about Thyra," Davin said finally. "I want to know where you're from." So she did. She told him about crystalline forests that sang in the wind, about cities built into ice that never melted, about oceans that glowed with bioluminescence and skies that showed colors human eyes couldn't see. And he told her about Earth, about real oceans with waves that crashed, about forests made of wood instead of crystal, about the grandmother who'd raised him and taught him to apologize for everything. 8 hours passed like minutes, and when the storm cleared and the doors unsealed, neither of them moved immediately. They stayed there in the observation deck, talking about everything and nothing, two people from different worlds finding common ground in the space between stars. Empty Sector 47 turned out to be spectacularly misnamed. The way station hung in orbit around a binary star system, enormous and ancient and very much not empty. Its architecture matched the temple on Primary. That same impossible geometry that hurt to look at directly, surfaces that seemed to exist in more dimensions than three. The founders really committed to their aesthetic, Davin observed from the transit pod as they approached. Aggressively uncomfortable angles everywhere they went. Sela was running scans, her equipment lighting up with data that made her eyes go wide. This isn't just a way station. It's a nexus. Look at these energy signatures. It's still powered, still functional after however many millennia. The entire crew had deployed for this one. Every specialist the Meridian's Echo possessed, because whatever they'd found was too significant to approach with anything less than full commitment. Captain Rothberg had given her usual pre-mission speech about caution and protocol, then added an uncharacteristic postscript about how finding something this important could shift the political landscape in ways we can't predict, which everyone understood meant, try not to start an interstellar incident. Davin and Sela had been assigned to the central chamber, naturally. After spending 8 hours trapped together during the solar storm, then another 3 weeks of increasingly less accidental encounters in observation decks and mess halls and empty corridors, the crew had stopped pretending not to notice what was happening between them. Oro had started taking bets on when they'd make it official, which Davin found both embarrassing and oddly touching. The way station's interior was vast enough to swallow their entire ship, with sections that shifted atmospheric composition as they moved through them. Davin watched his suit's sensors adjust to oxygen levels that varied wildly from room to room, gravity that pulled in different directions depending on where you stood. This place was designed for multiple species, Sela said, her voice crackling slightly over the comm. Look, this section has high-gravity adaptation for heavy worlders. That corridor there shows signs of aquatic environment accommodation. The founders weren't just one species, they were many. They reached the central chamber through a corridor that seemed to stretch longer than it should, another architectural impossibility that Davin's brain had given up trying to rationalize. The chamber itself was breathtaking, a sphere of space easily 100 meters across, walls covered in the same crystalline formations they'd seen in the temple, all of them pulsing with soft light. At the center floated something that looked like a miniature star, contained within a framework of energy that bent light around it in rainbow spirals. Is that, Davin started. A stabilized quantum core, Sela finished, already moving closer with her scanning equipment. This is the way station's power source. It's been running for thousands of years without maintenance. Dr. Yamoto's voice crackled over the team comm. We're finding database access points all over the structure. This whole place is one massive information repository. Whatever the founders wanted to preserve, they put it here. Davin approached one of the crystalline formations, remembering how they'd activated the temple's systems. He touched it hesitantly, and the crystal responded instantly, flooding the chamber with light and information. Three-dimensional projections filled the space, not just star maps this time but something more. Cultural archives, historical records, technical specifications for technologies that shouldn't exist. A voice spoke, synthesized and strange, pulling phonemes from multiple languages to create something comprehensible. Greetings, inheritors. You have found the nexus. We are the foundry, not one people, but many who chose connection over isolation. Sela's hand found Davin's without either of them consciously deciding to reach out. They stood together, watching as the database began to tell its story. The foundry had been dozens of species, spread across hundreds of worlds, all of them discovering the same fundamental truth. Isolation led to stagnation, connection led to growth. They'd built networks, shared knowledge, created technologies that allowed different biologies to coexist and thrive together. They disappeared, Davin said. Why? Not disappeared, the voice corrected. Transcended. When different minds work together long enough, they create something greater than the sum of parts. We evolved beyond physical form, but left this legacy for those who would come after. For you, the projections shifted, showing something new. Complete navigational charts, routes through space that connected human and Thyran territories through pathways that treated conventional physics as suggestions rather than laws. Safe passages, efficient corridors, ways to turn months of travel into days. We offer you what we built, the voice continued. Bridges between your peoples. The choice to connect or remain apart is yours, but we provide the means should you choose connection. Sela was crying, Davin realized. Tears tracking down her blue skin, catching the light from 1,000 projections. This could change everything, she whispered. If our governments had these roots, the border tensions, the isolation, it could all shift. We're transmitting this to the ship, Captain Rothberg's voice came through, tight with barely contained emotion. This is bigger than our mission, bigger than any of us. They spent hours in the chamber, recording everything, documenting technologies and cultural archives, and the complete story of people who'd chosen to become more than they were through connection with others. When they finally returned to the Meridian's echo, exhausted and overwhelmed, the entire crew gathered in the briefing room to process what they'd found. Fleet Command wants us home immediately, Rothberg announced. This data, the navigation routes alone, could transform human-Thyran relations. The technology could advance both civilizations by centuries. We're looking at a complete paradigm shift. Assuming our governments don't screw it up, Oro added helpfully. That's above our pay grade, Rothberg said. Our job was to find this. What they do with it is up to them. The ship turned toward home, carrying data that might reshape the political landscape of known space. Davin found himself in the navigation chamber that night, unable to sleep, staring at the routes they'd discovered. Paths that could connect worlds, ways to make the impossible merely difficult. Sela appeared in the doorway because of course she did. They'd stopped pretending their meetings were accidental about 2 weeks ago. Can't sleep either, she asked, moving to stand beside him. Thinking about what happens when we get back. Your family is in the border region. Mine is on Earth. With these new routes, we could actually visit each other's worlds. She leaned against the console, close enough that their shoulders touched. Assuming our governments don't immediately weaponize the data and make everything worse. That would be very on brand for governments. Depressingly so. She turned to look at him properly. I've been thinking about what Tors said, about biological incompatibility and cultural differences, and all the practical reasons this shouldn't work. And I think she's right. It's going to be complicated. Different life stages, different biological needs, different everything. Your people age faster than mine. Your culture approaches relationships completely differently than Thyran bonding practices. We'll probably mess this up spectacularly at least a dozen times. This is a very pessimistic pep talk. I'm not finished. She took his hand, interlacing their fingers, human and Thyran. It's going to be complicated and messy and difficult, but the founders figured it out. Dozens of species, all working together, creating something none of them could have built alone. If they could transcend biology and physics and thousands of years of isolation, I think we can manage a relationship. When you put it that way, our problems seem almost manageable. Almost. She smiled, and it transformed her face into something luminous. I don't know what happens when we get home, Kael. I don't know if our governments will use these routes for trade or for military advantage. I don't know if the political situation will improve or collapse completely. But I know that 3 months ago, You opened the wrong door and saw something you shouldn't have, and instead of making things awkward forever, it led to this. To us standing here, having found something that might change our entire civilizations. You're saying the universe was orchestrating this. I'm saying that sometimes the wrong door is exactly the right door. You just don't know it until later. Through the viewport, stars wheeled past in their ancient dance, indifferent to the small dramas playing out in the ship passing through their light. The Meridian's echo carried its crew homeward, bearing data that might bridge worlds or drive them further apart. And in the navigation chamber, two people from different worlds stood together and chose connection over fear. So what happens now? Davin asked. Now we go home, we deliver the data, we deal with whatever political chaos follows, and somewhere in all of that we figure out how to make this work. She squeezed his hand. The founders left us a map, Kael. Not just through space, but through the complications of connection. We just have to be brave enough to follow it. I can do brave. Brave is easier than figuring out Thyran bonding customs. I'll teach you. It mostly involves elaborate ceremonial wrapping and long discussions about crystalline harmonics. That sounds made up. It absolutely is. I'm testing to see if you'll believe anything I say. He laughed and she joined him, and the sound of it filled the navigation chamber like music. Outside, the ship's engines hummed their steady song, carrying them toward home and uncertainty, and all the complicated beauty of connection between different worlds. The route was uncharted, the destination uncertain, but they had maps now, to stars and to each other, and sometimes that was enough. The wrong door had led to the right place after all. It just took a journey to the edge of charted space and back to understand what that meant.